Messalina was barely 15 years old when it happened, although it was often said that she already possessed a beauty and bearing that made her stand out among the young noblewomen of Rome. Her life was lived in the opulence of her family home, surrounded by servants and with access to the privileges of the aristocracy. She had never experienced real danger, her world was carefully protected, or so she believed. That night, Rome was a hive of noise and bustle. Celebrations for the Emperor Caligula's victory in Germania filled the streets, and Messalina, excited by the festive atmosphere, persuaded her servants to take her to watch the festivities from one of the balconies overlooking the Via Sacra. Despite the warnings of her slaves, the young woman insisted on going out without an escort, assuring them that she would not stray too far. The night air was thick with the scent of incense and smoky torches. Messalina was carried away by the joy of the moment, watching the processions with their golden banners and the crowds shouting praises to the emperor. But as the night wore on and the crowds began to disperse, she found herself more alone than she had expected. The bustle became a distant echo, and the light of the torches seemed to dim with each step. Before she knew it, she felt a firm hand on her arm. The acrid smell of sweat and a man's raspy voice made her turn around, but it all happened too fast. A rag soaked in a pungent odor covered her face, and within seconds, darkness took over her vision. When Messalina awoke, she found herself in a place she didn't recognize. The cold stone of the wall dug into her back, and a dull pain shot through her head. She tried to move, but her hands were bound. The room was almost completely dark, save for the dim light of an oil lamp hanging on a nearby wall. Blinking, she began to make out silhouettes around her, 3 figures, watching her with inquisitive eyes. "So you are the noble Messalina," said one of them, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek. His voice was deep, laden with contempt. "Your family has enemies, little one, and we have a particular interest in you." Messalina felt a chill run through her body. She tried to stand firm, but her voice shook as she asked, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the small room. "Your family has offended very powerful people, Messalina. And now, you will pay the price for their mistakes." For days that seemed like weeks, Messalina was held captive in this unknown place. She was fed sparingly and allowed little sleep. Her captors constantly questioned her about her family, her connections, and the possible enemies of the house. However, the young woman knew little about the political affairs of her family, and her answers were useless to them. Over time, Messalina began to notice strange things about the place. One night, she heard murmurings coming from an adjoining room, and then saw shadows moving in the doorway. Her captors were no mere bandits, there was something darker behind their purpose. One night, when the silence grew thicker than usual, the door to her cell opened without warning. Messalina stepped back, expecting to see the scarred man, but instead, a hooded figure slid into the room. The figure crouched in front of her and pulled back the hood, revealing the face of an elderly woman with piercing eyes. "There are forces at play that you do not understand, child," the woman whispered. "You have been brought here not just for vengeance, but for something much older, darker. You are needed for a ritual." The woman's words were cryptic, but Messalina could sense the truth in them. That night, she realized that she was not just a bargaining chip, but a centerpiece in something far more dangerous. Fear gripped her, and as the woman stepped outside, she began to plot a desperate plan to escape. In the early morning, when the guards were changing shifts, Messalina took advantage of a moment of distraction. She had managed to loosen the ropes that bound her and, with a quick movement, slipped out of the cell. She ran through the dark corridors, stumbling and falling in the gloom, until finally she saw a wooden door that seemed to lead outside. She opened it with all her strength and found herself in a dense forest, the branches intertwined above her head forming a dark natural roof. She ran without looking back, her heart beating like a drum in her ears. In the distance, she heard voices calling her, but she didn't stop. The moonlight barely penetrated the treetops, and her bare feet became bloody as she stepped on rocks and branches. But it didn't matter, all she wanted was to get away from that cursed place. Finally, she came to a dirt road and, following her instincts, found help in a small village nearby. The inhabitants took her back to Rome, where her family welcomed her with tears and hugs. Yet something in her had changed. The young Messalina was no longer an innocent aristocrat. She had seen darkness up close, and some of that darkness stayed with her. From that moment on, her eyes had a strange gleam, a spark of determination that no one had ever seen before. Years later, when she became Claudius's powerful and feared wife, some recalled the rumors of her kidnapping and her days in captivity. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone agreed that the experience had transformed her. Some said she had made a pact with the same shadows that had captured her, and that her insatiable ambition and political cunning were the result of that dark encounter in her youth.